Hello, hello, hello. How we doing? I know it's been a very long time, and I want to apologize for that. I hope to get back into this. A lot's happened in a very short amount of time, so I'm very sorry. I appreciate all the love I've gotten, and I really do apologize. We are going to be continuing Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldry. We're on chapter 10. I probably won't do a very long recording session just to kind of get in the groove of things. But we will go to chapter 11. We are on page 88, and that is on 98, so 10 pages. So let me take a drink of this water and let's get into it. Alright. Where did we leave off? Let's see. Chapter 10. There were repeat customers, although Viv supposed customer might be too strong a word while the drinks were free. When they opened, the washwoman and the ratkin were back. The woman had a friend in tow, and there were four others behind them. The ratkin scurried inside first, wafting a cloud of flour and pointed wordlessly at the latte on the menu. Tandri brewed for the first rush of customers, while Viv watched the street, nodding to herself if a few stragglers joined the short line. Business stayed reasonably steady too, with only a few gaps where one or the other of them wasn't pulling a fresh shot. Seems like the fishing is good, murmured Tandri, as she passed by with emptied mugs in hand. You are the angler, said Viv, smiling. I guess you know. She leaned out to peer into the dining area, where a scattering of sleepy folk murmured in tentative conversation. She glanced behind her and found that Tandri was up on a footstool with chalk in hand, adding a new line to the bottom of the slate menu. Free samples, today only. When she stepped down, she caught Viv questioning gaze and said, Let's see if the hook is really set. They were still doing slow business as the morning crept towards noon. When the Ackers student from the previous day reappeared, he stopped smartly inside, registered surprise at the people sipping their drinks in the dining area, and with only a distracted glance at Viv and Tandri, hurried to his spot in the vacant booth. He unloaded his book satchel again and resumed his scribbling in the cryptic consultation of his palm. For the next hour the man did nothing but avail himself of the seating, and Viv grew increasingly irritated. What is he doing? She asked Tandri in a loud whisper. She shrugged. Coursework, research. Although, why is he doing it here? I have no idea. Yesterday, I was also happy to have him, just to fill his seat, but if he's only to take up room, easy enough to find out, said Tandri as she rounded the counter. He gave her a distracted glance as she approached. Clenching his hand closed. Can I help you? He asked, a bit washisly. You took the words right out of my mouth, said Tandri. Thanks so much for visiting. And 2 days in a row. I'm just checking to see if you'd like a sample. I assume that's why you're here. Vivid drifted across the room to overhear. A sample. His eyes flicked between her horns and a tail. He seemed puzzled, as though he hadn't been asked the same question by a previous day. Coffee. A latte? You're aware this is a shop that serves drinks. Oh. He seemed to recover. Yes, well, there's no need. He smiled as though conferring a favor. I'll just be fine without. Tandri's polite smile thinned away, but then she deliberately appeared to apply a new one at a significantly higher wattage. Viv got the distinct impression that Tandri was unveiling the barest edge of something she normally kept cloaked. With a subtle purr, she asked, Can I ask what you're doing, Mr. Hemington? He stammered. Well, I would love to, but it's all very technical. He attempted to look apologetic. I'm very interested in technical matters, said Tandri. I've sat in on a few classes at Ackers. Try me, maybe. You have, Hemington blinked. Ah. Well, it's to do with ley lines, you see. He warmed to his subject as Tandri slid into the booth across from him and rested her chin on interlaced fingers. Then crisscross Thune and Thumic thread theory is preoccupied with the radiant effects on the material realm. That's a fascinating intersection with my area of study. He uncurled his hand, and the imprint of ring of sigils gloomed. He had a faint blue there. The symbols writhed on his palm, reshaped in a elixir light. A ley compass, said Tandre, pointing at it. Viv started at that. Well, yes, he replied, clearly pleased at her recognition. What I'm finding here is truly anomalous. You see scattered minor line nexuses throughout the city, and westward towards Cardis, but I found a nexus line right here. It is giving some terribly interesting readings. Ley lines, pulse, of course. Of course, agreed Tandre. But this nexus holds firm. It's really quite extraordinary. So I'm taking some measurements, assembling some notes. This could be the foundation of a fascinating paper, detailing their interactions with ward glyphs. Viv had a sick feeling in her stomach, and couldn't stop herself from glancing to where the Scalvert stone was hidden. She couldn't pretend that it wasn't responsible somehow, and if the student continued with his readings, the mention of a compass was unnerving. When there might that lead him? This is fascinating, Hemington, said Tandre. It is, isn't it? But this is a place of business, she continued. Of course we'd love to have you as a customer, but the seating here is really intended for patrons. Hemington adopted an expression of annoyed consternation. I don't really drink hot beverages. Tandre ignored his protest and smiled at him sweetly. And fortunately for you, today's samples are free. Yes, well, I suppose, he grudgingly allowed. I will take advantage of that. Excellent. I'll bring you a cup. She rose to return to the counter, but then turned back. Oh, and as a reminder, this is the last day of the promotional period. Only a half bit for our flagship beverage. Thank ever so much. As Tandre brewed a cup, Viv whispered, You an Akers graduate? Not a graduate as such, just took a few relevant classes. Relevant to what? To personal interests, she replied evasively. Viv didn't press. Tandre delivered the drink to Hemington, who stared at it doubtfully and made no move to drink it. After tapping her chin for a moment, Tandre took up the chalk and added another line to the menu. Purchase required to enjoy the dining area. Hemington eventually departed, leaving his untouched drink on the table. At least he had the decency to hover over it for a moment, clearly trying to decide which was least embarrassing, leaving it where it was or bringing the full cup up to the front. As he slunk past the counter, he noted Tandre's fresh addition to the sign. I would buy something. It's just as I said. I don't much care for hot drinks. Perhaps if there was something to eat, he said, a note of pleading in his voice. Said Viv, in her best impression of Cal. I'll take it under advisement. After he left, though, she glanced at the stove the hob had installed, and something niggled at her, a nascent idea. She let that percolate as she went to retrieve Hemington's mug. The shop had mostly emptied, although one old dwarf sat tucked away in the back, nursing his drink while he slowly ran his finger over a broad sheet, moving his lips as he read. Viv turned and stopped short. An enormous shaggy creature sat in the center of the shop. Sprawled in a square of sunlight, Tandre stood on its other side, eyes wide. The beast had to weigh 10 stone. I don't know how much that weighs. I do freedom metrics. I'm kidding. And was as big as a wolf, but it looked like nothing, so much as an enormous, shaggy, and slightly sooty house cat. It just appeared, said Tandre weakly. I didn't see it come in. What in the hell's is it? Asked Viv. The massive animal ignored them, but yawned, extended all the claws in its forepaws, and arched its back in a languorous stretch. Dire cat, a voice piped up from behind Viv. The elderly dwarf looked over from his paper. Don't see him no more. These days, supposed to be lucky. He squinted, or maybe unlucky. I forgot. You've seen one before. I used to be more around when I was wee, good ratters. He coughed. Also kept the stray dog population down. Tandre blanched. Should we try to move it? The dire cat regarded first Tandre, then Viv, with green eyes like saucers. Slowly they drifted to slits, and the rumble of distant landslides filled the room. Viv realized it was purring. She thought of thumps on the roof tiles and Laney's pilfered cake. She thought about the lines of verse in the Scalvert stone. Honestly, said Viv, I've learned one thing. It said if a beast isn't angry yet, don't get it started. I think I'll leave it to be. Maybe it will wander off. I'm pretty sure it lives around here. Tandri nodded dubiously and edged behind the counter. The elderly dwarf folded its barge seat under his arm, hopped down, and strolled past the cat, giving a scratch behind one of its enormous ears. Good girl, he said. Miss seeing him around. How can you tell it's a girl? Asked Tandri. The dwarf shrugged, guessing, but I ain't gonna lift a tail to find out for sure. The dire cat did not leave, but Viv managed to lure it to his less central corner of the shop with a dish of cream. The animal approached with a magisterial grace and surveyed the room, and then emptied the dish with a tongue as big as a spade. Then it resettled in a great, shaggy heap, and the sound of its rumbling purr trebled, and it fell asleep. Tandri was visibly relieved to have the creature out the way. The cafe was empty again, and what Viv was beginning to suspect would be the slowest part of the day, although she was hopeful they'd get at least a visitor or two. But the one who appeared at the threshold was the last person she wanted to see. Venice strode into the shop, hands behind his back, his perfume trailing like a cloak. His hair was pinned up, fashionably expressioned arch. The elf had always possessed a regal bearing. Viv could not understand how he managed to look down his nose at her, even though she was 2 heads taller. She'd crewed him for years, and neither had warned the other. Viv tried to chalk it up to personality conflict, but deep down, she knew it was a mutual dislike. Venice always found ways to make her feel less than, with the barest twist of inflection, or a carefully chosen word slipped like a knife between the ribs, so sharp you didn't notice the wound until you looked up from a lap full of blood. And Viv wasn't above a blunt riposte, even if it often came far too late. She'd assumed she'd never see him again, and would have been glad of it. The fact that he was darkening her doorway meant he wanted something. She very much hoped she was wrong. Still, she forced a smile. Venice, surprised to see you here. His smile was even more false than hers, although it hardly married his beauty. Viv, I've heard from Rune that you'd set up a... He glanced around with perfectly wrinkled brow. Enterprise. I thought I'd see for myself. And how is Rune? Oh well, very well. He ran a finger along the countertop and inspected it. Tandri watched the exchange with pursed lips and clearly noticed the electric buzz of tension. Leaning on the counter and adopting a smile, she addressed the elf. Hello there. I don't want to interrupt, but would you care for a sample? It's a grand opening promotion. Grand opening? Just the slightest quirk to the first word. The tiniest caress of amusement. Ah! Is this that gnomish beverage you were so taken with? He glanced at Viv with an indulgent smile. No, not for me. Thank you kindly. I'm just stopping in to see an old friend. A pleasure, said Viv. It wasn't. Yes, so excellent to see you off in such a promising start. The elf surveyed the conspicuously empty dining area, maintaining his smile. He delicately rapped a knuckle against the coffee maker, and cocked an ear at the subtle tone it generated. It does indeed have a ring of fortune about it. Viv froze. Then suddenly, a furry bulk stalked past her to stand in front of Venice. In the rocks down a washboard, sound of its purr became something altogether more menacing. The dire cat's hair stood up on end, making it look half again as large, and it hissed louder than the coffee maker ever had. Venice eyed the animal uncertainly. Is this thing yours? Tandri leaned further forward and surprised Viv with her tone of politely savage delight. She is a bit of a shop mascot. He wrinkled his nose in distaste, and then his eyes flicked to Viv. Charming. Well, I suppose I'll be on my way. I only wanted to deliver my congratulations. Best wishes, Viv. She silently watched him leave, and Tandri came around the counter to hunker in front of the enormous cat, which was now licking one forepaw with regal deliberation, looking pleased with itself. Tandri's prior apprehensions forgotten, she scratched behind the dire cat's ears, lifting a deeper purr and murmured, You're a good girl, aren't you? You know, a dickhead when you see one. She looked at Viv. Old co-worker? No love lost between you two, I guess? Something like that. Being the best of friends isn't a requirement for work I used to do. Tandri returned her attention to the cat. You need a name. How about Amity? Viv snorted, unable to suppress a small smile. Why not? Since you're already such fast friends. Not like you and him, Tandra jerked a thumb towards the recently departed elf. What do you think he really wanted? Viv didn't answer. Instead of thinking of what Fennis had said, her hands went to the folded scrap of hers she kept in her pocket. Well nigh to Thumek line, the scalvard stone of fire draws the ring of fortune, aspect of heart's desire. Well, well, well. Something's a brewing in this cafe. Well, actually, I might continue reading because this next chapter is not very long. So, how about we just continue a little? Chapter 11. We are on page 98. Despite a fitful sleep plagued with worries over Fennis, Viv eventually steered her thoughts to Hennington's parting comments about her food. While she ruminated, Tanji blacked out the lines on the signboards mentioning free samples and limited supplies and adjusted the menu while she was at it. When the regulars returned, plus a few new faces, Viv noted with pleasure that they paid for their drinks without complaint. Viv and Tanji shared a relieved glance and got down to business, enjoying the warm bustle behind the hissing machine. Cal stopped in again. Too obviously relieved, there was no silence to fill the idle observations. He groused when Viv refused his copper, but hovered by the counter while he drank, nodding every once in a while as he watched them work, remembering the idea she'd been toying with. Viv asked Tanji to handle brewing duties halfway through the rush. Tanji smoothly took up the orders while Viv went to find the ratkin tucked away in one of the back corner booths, feet swinging, eyes closed, meditating over his steaming mug. She slid in across from him, and his bright eyes opened to regard her warily. He was wearing the same apron she'd seen him in every morning, white and glibly with flour, a close pale powder flecked with fine hairs on his arm and face as well. Hi there, I'm Viv. He nodded and slurped at his latte. Not too talkative? He shook his head. That's all right. But I wanted to ask you something. I noticed your... She gestured at his apron. Well, the flour. And I wondered if you happen to know anything about baking. The Ratkin stared at her, whiskers twitching, and gently set down his mug and then gave a slow triple nod. You do? So I have something of an idea. I'm thinking what this place might need is some... breads. Or something baked to eat. She squeezed in an invisible loaf between her hands. Snacks, I guess. Not something I know much about, though. But I thought you, well, if you did know something about that, then... The Ratkin raised a tentative paw, the forestaller, leaning forward over his drink. In a tiny, breathy voice, he said, Tomorrow. Tomorrow. He nodded again eagerly, Viv thought. She didn't know whether he had to be on his way or needed a few hours to think, but despite her curiosity, she wasn't going to press the matter. She rapped the table and stood. I look forward to it, Mr. He stared up at her, and in solemn whisper said, Thimble. Thimble, Viv agreed. She gave him a nod and returned to the counter. The afternoon again became a desert of inactivity. Hemmington returned and purchased a drink, pained expression on his face. Once more left untouched, Viv wiped down the empty table's dining area. Gathering dirty mugs, suddenly Tandra's voice cut through the hush, her tone icy. What are you doing here? Tanji glared at a young man who leaned on the countertop, gazing back at her in an overly familiar way. His soft handsomeness hinted at money. And while he wasn't wearing the split robes Hemmington wore, Viv saw one of the stag pins on his tailored shirt. Saw you through the window and just had to stop by, he replied. Haven't seen you in a while, Tandri. I'd almost think you were avoiding me, and you'd be right. Well, I'm only here as a customer, so we call this a intervention of fate. You just said you saw me through the window. If fate intervenes, it'll be turn you around and send you right back out. Now don't be that way. A succubus like you can feel this. He gestured between them. This attraction, I know you can. Tanji looked stricken, and then her expression became deliberately neutral. Kellen, there is no attraction. There never has been. I think you should leave. But I haven't bought anything yet, he protested, a smile in his voice. I don't think we have anything you want, said Viv, approaching the front of the shop and looming arms crossed. Kellen turned his attention to her, and his easy smile vanished, replaced by something sharper. I don't remember involving you in this conversation. Viv was mildly surprised. He hadn't quailed at the sight of her. It's my shop, said Viv evenly. I serve who I want, when I want, and I don't think I want to serve you. So I'll ask you to leave. Kellen stared at her hard for a moment, sneer developing. I don't guess you've met the Madrigal yet. At some point, everybody around here serves him. Which means that sooner or later, you're going to be paying your dues to me. Oh, so you're his errand boy? I thought that was the man with the very fine hat. He was about to retort when Amity emerged from behind Viv and strolled with a deadly grace. She settled beside Tandri and definitely licked a massive paw. Kellen blinked, but recovered his sneer. Viv couldn't decide if he was brave or stupid. I'll leave for now, he said, but you'll be seeing me again. He looked at Tandri again with that soft, proprietary smile. But you and me, we'll catch up later. Looking forward to it. Fate. He left. Tandri released a slow breath. What was that all about? Asked Viv. He was a student in Ackers. He had a Tandri searched for words and a healthy obsession with me. When you took classes there for personal interest? Yes. Guess he's working for the head of the local hoods, too. Seems education didn't lead to better things. Oh, I'm not surprised at all, Tandri muttered darkly. We'll keep him out. The succubus crouched next to the dark cat. Or maybe Amity needs a snack. Are you hungry, girl? Amity purred like rockfall. That evening, Tandri left long enough to collect some blankets and a big goose down pillow. She and Viv put together a makeshift bed in the back corner of the shop for the dire cat. The next time Amity reappeared, she stalked over to the rumpled pile, patted experimentally with one enormous forepaw, then strolled away. But they left the bed. Thimble rapped on the front door as the two of them prepared to open. In his hands he clutched a cloth-wrapped lump that trailed whiffs of steam. Viv smelled something warm and yeasty and sweet, and thought she recognized cinnamon, too. He scuttled indoors. Tandri emerged from the pantry with a bag of beans and a carafe of milk, inhaling deeply. What is that wonderful smell? The raccoon glanced anxiously between them, and then slid his wrapped bundle onto the countertop. Viv pointed at it. May I? Thimble nodded, hesitantly. Carefully unfolding the cloth, Viv revealed a roll as big as her fist, almost too large to imagine eating. Soft bread wound in a spiral, with dark sugar and cinnamon nestled between the rings, and thick, creamy glaze frosted on top and dripped down the sides. Tandri was right. The scent was unbelievably amazing. You made this? Asked Viv, impressed. Did, whispered the raccoon again. With the little bobbing nod, his hands clasped before the flour-dusted apron. Viv and Tandri glanced, and then Viv delicately tore a piece from the enormous roll, sniffed deeply, and popped it into her mouth. She closed her eyes and made an involuntary noise of pleasure. It was easily the most delicious thing she had in, well, maybe ever. Good gods, she murmured around the mouthful. Tandri, try it. Tandri peeled off a piece and obliged. As she chewed, Viv could feel some kind of atmospheric shift around Tandri, a sultry radiance, and her tail lashed back and forth in elegant loops. Viv and the ratkin watched her chew, rapt, when the succubus opened her eyes again. Her irises were huge, cheeks flushed. She looked dreamily at the ratkin. You're hired. Her voice had gone husky. Then she startled and glanced at Viv. The aura dissipated. Wait, that is why he's here, isn't it? Viv turned to Thimble. How would you like to bake these here every day? He nodded and shifted from foot to foot as though he wanted to say something, but he couldn't find the words. 4 silver a week, prompted Viv. She looked at Tandri to make sure there would be no objection. The succubus nodded, eyes big, made a yes, yes, get on with it, flapping with her hands. Thimble nodded in affirmative, then he stretched out his nose, and for the first time uttered more than one word in his silky whisper. Free coffee? Viv offered a hand. Thimble, you can have all the coffee you want. Looks like they got a bakery going. Alright. I'm going to stop it there. It's getting interesting. They got a baker. I want to thank everybody, and I apologize for being gone for so long. Um, I hope to get back into this. Harris Hall out.